Thank you for joining us for another episode of Channel Revelations. I'm Ethan Fox, and I'm here with Micheila Sheldan, and we'll be spending the next couple of hours channeling on a particular topic. And as I always say, Micheila is a trance channel, but I prefer not to discuss these topics or the questions with her ahead of time, just so that her conscious mind doesn't interfere in any which way with the questions or the information that we're bringing through. So we'll be speaking directly to the guides in this conversation. So whenever you're ready, we can start.
All right. We're ready.
Who are we speaking with today?
We have the Council of Light standing ready, but we're also working with the Order of Melchizedek, and we have the Great White Brotherhood.
Any particular reason why they chose to come through today?
We're always anticipating some of the intentions that you are bringing to us and gathering the most qualified beings, guides, collectives with the appropriate background to offer what is necessary.
For those who may not understand that concept, obviously, I didn't discuss these questions with Micheila or with the channel. So, how do the guides anticipate what I'm going to ask before I ask it?
It isn't that we know ahead of time what you are thinking. So it's important for us to state that we're not anticipating by accessing your energy field at any one given point in time and trying to move into the future to gather wisdom about how these interactions will go, because that would merely be a waste of time. Everything is happening in the here and now. And we are more focused into the present moment than many of you are today. And in fact, we consider ourselves quantum beings in a state of coherence, meaning everything that is preparing to happen in the next moment is tangibly accessible in the here and now. So as we appear to you and as you request our appearance, we're already touching in to the energies that need to be assembled to provide what is necessary to open these conversations.
And who are the Order of Melchizedek?
We are a great many assembly of divine masculine beings. We may call ourselves a brotherhood in that respect. We span all space and time, so we are not limited to any one timeline, especially on the earth, as the origins of Melchizedek are intergalactic and come from the cosmos. But we consider ourselves very focused on moving the human collective and the earth forward, even though we have a more cosmic orientation. We are those that have been trained in the right of working with universal law to access the energy within us and to support individualized experiences necessary. We have been both earthly and in human bodies, as well as hybrid in nature. And we do follow a specific regimented order of initiations. These initiations have gone on for quite some time, but they do transpose themselves according to the dimension that the souls who are being initiated exist within. We also consider ourselves record keepers in a sense. We were present at the time of Christ and working not only with those that were at the ground level, walking a more physical, manifested experience of that journey, yet also light teachers in some of the mystery schools, accessing the Akashic records at times to support those endeavors.
So you're talking about one of your roles is to help humanity move forward. Now, in a lot of alternative circles and metaphysical, spiritual circles, there is the belief that there are collectives of multidimensional or even physical extraterrestrial beings who are assisting humanity in some way. And much of that belief is around doing physical actions, whether it is interfacing with world governments or fighting interdimensional wars and so on. to help humanity in some physical way move forward. Is there any truth to any of those beliefs? Even a lot of channels out there seem to focus on channeling these federations of supposedly extraterrestrial beings who are fighting wars to assist humanity.
What we have learned in all of our training and all of the time that we have spent as souls moving through an evolutionary process is this. Anything that you create in your experience will become a part forever of the eternal spiral of time, meaning it will come back around and in some way be a part of what future generations will experience. And this has little to do with the exclusivity of Earth and more a broad scope universal law. So, with this in mind, while there are many intergalactic groups and councils who would prefer to still use war as an agent of change, those at the highest levels, those that we ascend to work with, would never consider war of any kind to be an appropriate action to solve itself. Because if we are putting into the vibrational container something of the same vibration that we are attempting to change, we are only strengthening it. So, do we negate that these wars you speak of take place? No, we see them happening all of the time. And we think there is a little disillusionment about their intentions and their purpose, because while there may be very malevolent and heart-focused beings looking at the earth and all of the things that are happening, wanting to change it, their desire for that change might not be coming from the most pure place, meaning they have something to gain in the process. So it's difficult for us to bring this explanation through because we have deep appreciation for those who are touching in to so much of what's happening in alternate dimensions. At the same time, if we take this up to the highest level, we must understand that God, universe, prime creator, balances everything. If we think that we need to get involved in something and orchestrate a similar action to change it in some way, we should be cautious about how much creative energy, attention, and time we are inputting and what our intention truly is in that endeavor.
What about the belief that there are white hats, whether they are extraterrestrial in origin or even within our governments or agencies around the world, that these individuals are out there actually doing positive things to move humanity forward? Is there such a group in the world leadership or extraterrestrial influences on the planet?
Not one group exclusively, yet we cannot deny that there are many, many different hybrid representations of intergalactic souls who have chosen to come to Earth at this time to get their hands dirty in the physical plane, to interact with souls who have great powers and abilities to offer the human collective. Yet, this is never done in secret. And that, we think, is the defining factor as to whether or not it's actually assisting. The highest dimensional beings, again, those with the most heartfelt and benevolent intentions, would never hide the truth of what they are doing from others. What they want is not to take ownership of any problem. And we have learned this long ago. It is interference to get involved in a situation that is not yours to claim. Because by its very nature, that interference is going to add something to the equation that could make it a more difficult healing endeavor. Yet, we want to acknowledge we come, for example, as some of us ascended masters and light teachers, to help raise consciousness. What we truly want is for humans to understand that the white hats, quote unquote, that they believe exist on planet Earth that are saving them from these various actions actually exist within themselves. You are here as a part of a collective having an earthly experience that was necessary to reclaim your sovereignty, the God and goddess within you, and the true power that you have to live in such a way that everyone experiences peace and bliss and abundance. But the only reason you stand so far away from that today is that you've been taken so far away from that belief. Anytime you are asked to put a savior above yourself, or you are looking to a savior to take away your problem, you have put a contradiction in the way of your own life force energy and the capability that you have to create a reality that reflects what it is you desire. So we think going back and looking at history and religion and a variety of different educational mediums on planet Earth, there is a seeded program to direct humans' attention away from their own ability to live in a sovereign way and place that in the hands of others. And we might say this is why you find yourselves experiencing such a chaotic situation today. Those who are touching in and channeling what you term white hats, however, may not necessarily be wrong. And so we have to caveat all that we are saying. There are many intergalactic souls, even angelic beings, who come to Earth and believe wholeheartedly that what they are doing is kind and beneficial in nature, when it actually isn't. And we see this all of the time on the plane of Earth. Humans have pure intentions, but they don't exactly go about expressing and acting upon those intentions in the most efficient way.
So what you're saying is that we are the white hat. So is that correct?
Exactly.
And so it's our responsibility to move humanity forward. We shouldn't necessarily depend on whatever white hats are.
And we don't even want you to use the word responsibility, because we think within that word, there's a great burden that is placed upon humanity, making it seem as if it is difficult. What we believe is what consciousness provides is a series of alternate options and an expanded viewpoint of your reality beyond where you have become restricted. And restriction away from anything is what's causing the most harm. Even the idea of a white hat, a collective of souls who are here to save the planet, causes a soul to restrict away from its inclusion in that. So by its very nature, it's causing undue separation and judgment, we believe. So certainly we're validating what you are saying. We just want to put a different terminology on it. Perhaps instead of a responsibility, it's your innate essence and your nature to work within these energies and to bring them to calm.
With regard to your earlier statement that for beings to come here and interfere with the human evolution or development process, what constitutes interference? So if they are coming here as part of their journey to play a role in the evolution of humanity, and even though their consciousness may not be at the highest level, and they're trying to be white hats, is that interference then?
So let's take this to a more earthly example, and then we'll bring it up to a more larger scope concept. Over the last several years, many of you on planet Earth have felt the need and the desire to change and inform others about what you know and what you have come to understand as consciously and highly vibrating beings. And the intention there is very good. Yet, what has tended to happen, we see, is more restriction and more separation, because in the delivery of that information or in the desire to change another, sometimes we end up stepping on the toes of their own sovereignty. And we know this is a hard thing to hear. Yet, if you look back at all that has happened, you are seeing the destruction of relationships and families with very different belief systems. And we don't necessarily think that that has to happen. So when you are interfering in a situation, trying to change something or someone or a planet or an entire race, it's typically very important to understand that free will reigns. You're not here necessarily to change the direction of a divine plan you know nothing about. What you're here to do is change the playing field upon which that divine plan unfolds. And that could only be an energetic or vibrational offering, meaning we're attempting to bring souls into their confidence. We're attempting to bring them into their highest vibrational state. We're attempting to help them break open Akashic records and move through a threshold of consciousness that they may have been stuck in for a very long period of time. Now, on the earth plane, we know that isn't easy, because you believe to do that, you must prove why it is important. But the proving itself is often putting into the Akashic records or the spiral of time something that you don't want to revisit, which is hierarchy oftentimes. And for us, as higher dimensional guides and beings who have great love and appreciation for humanity, it is not our role to come in and say that you are doing wrong. It is never our role to come in and correct decisions that you have made, or even give you information about decisions that should be made in the future to change anything. What we want for you is to understand that everything you need already exists, and to begin to trust more in your own intuition and authority. Because once that happens, everything around you will begin to change. What we're attempting to do is keep our ego and our judgment out of the field in which we are co-creating. And this is where we think so much of that contradiction we spoke of tends to harm, where we're putting something in the way of awakening as opposed to facilitating it in a very loving and supportive process.
Okay, so let me string a few ideas together that you discussed to make sure my understanding is correct. So what you're saying is that the highest vibrational beings are focused, such as yourselves and the Council of Light and so on, are focused on changing the playing field, where these other beings who may be whatever is known as the white hats, or that are being channeled by other channels as well, may be influencing physical things. And so physical things are not the playing field. Physical things are for humans to interact and change our own journey. So when you're saying playing field, though, you're referring to consciousness. So it's okay for higher vibrational beings such as yourselves to increase consciousness, because consciousness does not affect our free will. It simply provides more range of options for human beings to choose from, but ultimately it's the human collective consciousness that has to make those physical choices. Is that understanding correct?
We're the Council of Light, and we want to clarify the playing field analogy and give you some examples about how we would support humans in a situation where we believe they do not realize their power. It is very important, of course, to consider vibration, and that is always our upper echelon choice and go-to in these situations. For example, you have started with war. When we see war taking place anywhere throughout the universe, even on planet Earth, our goal is to raise vibration and to offer the matching timelines of that vibration to you, meaning we are attempting to find within the Akashic records periods of peace and to raise the bar on the vibration of every human to access the energy of those timelines. And the way this translates is personal evolution, desires, excitement, to do things differently than what is actually being carried out. So even if a group of humans, a collective of beings exists on the opposite side of the planet as to where the war is taking place, if they are accessing timelines of peace and being inspired by what they are accessing and putting that into somehow action around them, whether it is just feeling at peace and holding that vibration as a potential for others, or applying it in some constructive way, that is going to make the biggest impact than us trying to change the war itself. But you've added an interesting concept here about the physical plane versus the vibrational plane. And we're talking about a playing field. So if we see humans today, for example, making choices out of fear, and those are physical choices that are manifesting in concrete realities, sometimes the vibration is not the only solution. Raising consciousness, which is a bit different than vibration, helps humans to see those choices through a multidimensional lens. And part of the problem that we've noticed is that you're repeating many of the same timeline experiences over and over again. And it comes from a very narrow viewpoint or a restricted level of consciousness where you believe there are only a certain number of options or conditions are put in the way of yes or no. We can only do this or that or the other thing. Now, we know the next question may be, how do you do this? And as the Council of Light, we notice certain significant planetary alignments, for example, where energy is strongly moving through the galactic grids to Earth. And we can manipulate and change that vibration. And this is why at times you will see great leaps in consciousness. This has little to do with us only. What we're doing is we're providing a foundation, even a hertz or a frequency or a sound that facilitates what that planetary alignment is already apt to do. So we are searching always, we're observing always for avenues of advantageous avenues where we are able to contribute something that is not going to change what's happening necessarily directly through us or by us, but to offer humans the opportunity to see that change within themselves.
On a side note, I've noticed that sometimes when the guides speak through the channel, they stumble for words that are obviously some of which are in her vocabulary, or they mispronounce words that she mispronounces. What's the reason for that?
There are a combination of reasons for this. When we are providing a transmission, this detail that is coming through in a quantum fashion, which is a very high plasmic vibration. And that means that the physical plane or the physical words or vocabulary has to keep up and meet with that vibration. It is not always an easy task for the conduit who is not conscious to be able to do that. But yes, also as higher dimensional beings, we are searching for physical concepts and terminology that assimilates and matches what we are trying to relay, which isn't always in perfect balance or equilibrium. So keep in mind that we're speaking different languages. We are different beings with different concepts. And there is a very brief second in time where those concepts become translated into something humanly understandable. And that doesn't always go smoothly.
Okay. Now, I've seen numerous videos. I don't know if they're legitimate videos or not of spacecraft of some sort, UFO type of craft that are apparently disabling or disarming nuclear weapons. Um, is this something that higher beings such as yourselves would do, or is this some other what we would call white hats?
We do see some of this going on, and we want to clarify that not all of what you are seeing is actually true. There is an initiative to lead humans in this direction, to help them believe, in other words, that there is something handling a situation for them that they have no power themselves to contribute to. Yet, there are, on occasion, ships and groups of beings who are attempting to destroy nuclear weapons, for example, and other things that exist on planet Earth. Yet, we do want to go back to the original question and reiterate what the Order of Melchizedek has said about this, because we believe the same. This is not in humans' best interest. Even though you might believe that destroying a weapon that would be used against another human is saving the planet from something detrimental, it's putting more war and destruction and separation in your Akashic records to deal with in the future. You assume that there are white hats and there are black hats. And certainly in past transmissions, we've discussed a great deal about reptilian influence and reptilian consciousness and malevolent beings who have been here for a great many years. But in our dimension, what we have come to is this. The universe is always rebalancing energy. If we will allow it and stay focused on what we are here to do and how we are here to serve, we don't have to worry about taking drastic acts like that, because a nuclear weapon by and of itself, even though it is a material manifestation, is made of the contribution of energy of millions and trillions of beings. Meaning, the simple reality that that exists and is being reinforced on a daily basis in the minds and hearts of many is strengthening its potential to continue to exist in this way. And we're not suggesting that you should by any means ignore some of the more dangerous aspects of your physical reality or believe them to not be true, because they certainly are concrete and very true. Yet how you address them within yourself, how you apply your consciousness to the situation, is the most powerful resolve. So if everything is physical and vibrational at its core, and we only use a physical means to change it, but we haven't taken care of the vibration, we're missing out on complete and total healing. And that is something that we have learned in many different incarnations and lifetimes, and perhaps is the basis for why we assemble as a council at all. It is important for us to observe the vibrational ramifications of how energy is exchanged, but especially how the physical plane continues to repeat the same vibrational patterns in different forms. So we can take a nuclear weapon out of the sky in a physical sense, but the vibration that created it still goes on. And that's where we see a miss, perhaps, in what the intention of these beings are and the actual result may be. They are merely focusing upon a physical result. And in fact, we could say motivated from a sense of fear and urgency of that fear. But the vibration still continues on. So unless we have some concrete ability, a process, a modality to work with the energy, will never resolve these issues.
So if we are the white hats who need to move humanity forward, then what I've noticed, especially in current times on the planet, is that there is a sense of victimhood that seems to be prevalent across all facets of society, whether it is victimhood of racism or victimhood over sexual preferences or identity or things like that, or just victimhood in terms of the feeling that we have no control because there are world leaders who are more powerful and have all the money and who are causing all these problems on the planet. And from psychological research, it seems to suggest that when people have a victimhood mindset, they tend to feel less confident, like they are disempowered or they're at a disadvantage in society. So how does humanity move forward if we are the white hats to make positive changes and move society forward if there is this psychological programming that's taking place on the planet that's putting most people into this state of victimhood?
Well, that's a very difficult question for us to answer because we would have to come at it from many different angles. But we want to focus on what you're asking and simplify our answer to the best of our ability. This victimhood program that you're observing within the collective, to us, it's weakening the human DNA in a sense, because even though you would never make the relationship between what you believe is capable within you and what victimhood suppresses being related to the DNA, it is. The strands of DNA, whether we're looking at physical or crystal, hold within them not only the information that we are apt to bring in from the cosmos to support our soul's divine plan, but also all of the genetic predispositions that we somehow come to override. And if we go back to the very beginning of time, we can see this seeded program of victimhood actually changing the DNA, perhaps powering down, in a sense, the more illuminated strands, the ones in which help a soul to believe that it is not alone, not because it must rely on something outside of itself, but because it is all of those things by its very nature. So in interconnection, in unification, there is more power. So to cause a soul to feel as if they are a victim is to separate them from something that is holding them back in life. And you have become separate in a very unnatural way. And it begs the question, why are we individuals if we're meant to be a unified collective? Well, this is the beauty of Earth, is that you are here, in a sense, to, through a unique experience of creative energy, understand yourself as God by interacting with a variety of other unique manifestations of it. And this is where victimhood gets in the way, we think, of not only the flow of energy, but the illumination of the DNA, because we think we're here to do it alone, and we think we're only allowed what we have been told we are given. And if that inheritance, quote unquote, is dependent upon the color of our skin or our gender, or the amount of physical abundance we have, or the geographic region that we grew up in, it's a very convenient way of stepping out of a divine blueprint so beautiful and so immaculate that we will never realize it in our entire lifetime. But the question is, what do we do about it? And to perpetuate these ideals is somewhat the answer. Unfortunately, what we see, and many of you we know who are here with us are very aware of hierarchies and what that means, is that there's a hierarchical structure that is feeding these concepts to humanity. And as they are fed and downloaded through a variety of mediums, they become law. Within every human, there is a belief that there is something working against them that they were born with, as opposed to an understanding that they were born with everything they needed to be the most powerful manifestation of God on the planet. And to perpetuate these ideals, however they have been throughout time has to somewhat come to a close. And we'll give you an example because we are witnessing a great deal of finger pointing on planet Earth, especially when it comes to ancestral patterns, meaning the generation that went before us is to blame for what we are stuck dealing with today. And in that very notion, not only is there separation and restriction and judgment, but there's a weakening of power. If those who are here today, who have experienced trauma and fear and lack of love from the generation that went before them, were to supply it to the planet anyway, as opposed to trying to go back and erase it from their experience, the world could be healed instantaneously. Meaning we have to somehow come to a sense of not only forgiveness, but purpose. And in our realm, forgiveness is not about letting go of accountability. Forgiveness is about acknowledging what someone could not have given us before that we believed was necessary and now have the opportunity to give to others. Where we are a self-generating force of healing because we choose to use our energy in the proper direction. And in terms of racism, in terms of gender orientation, in terms of income level, this is the most important area, or these are the most important areas we assume where that has to take place. We can't keep looking backwards at who told us what and what we didn't get. We have to look forward as to how we reclaim it. And that could never be from other people. We're seeing also, we're observing this concept, we'll call it, of reparations, whether it be in a racial sense or in a sense of income and money. And it is the same analogy as an intergalactic ship shooting a nuclear bomb out of the sky. We can offer someone material reparations for something they did not receive in the past, but that is never going to take care of the underlying vibration. You, as a human soul, are not responsible for changing the vibration of others. You are only responsible for changing your own. And as you do, it works somewhat like a web, where the energy we build within us, the amount of love that we have for ourselves, regardless of what we were ever given from another, tends to spill over and implicate those in our field and even beyond. So healing is not as difficult as you may imagine, but it must start within each individual. Those of us who are here speak often about a tipping point. And this tipping point is a certain number of humans having to awaken to a certain threshold in order for the planet to change. And we don't necessarily think that threshold is a number. It's a vibration. And for you to reach the highest vibration within yourself does not require that you ignore anything that's happening on the planet. It simply entails your belief that you are here to positively influence it through the amount of love that you are able to generate.
So in previous conversations, we discussed things like the 369. Can a tool like the 369 be used to enter into this higher state of being where victimization or victimhood is neutralized?
And this is the Order of Melchizedek. It is a tool, yes. And those of us who were initiated into this order studied the philosophy behind this numerologic system for a great deal of our teaching. We know, of course, that in today's reality, the dimension has changed and belief systems have changed. And there is a certain degree of belief or understanding in the system required for it to be put into a very concrete practice. Yet the surrounding yourself by these numbers, it in any form, we'll say in any form, it causes two very distinct advantages. One If you will recall, the 369 pattern creates an unbroken connection to the universe. So universal energies begin to flow and amplify either within your space or within your body, however you're choosing to use this number pattern. And that is a positive because the amount of energy that you are working with determines the magnitude of manifestation that you are able to tap into. And when we say magnitude, we're talking about the quality and the quantity, meaning the ability to manifest not what you think you need and what you quote unquote have been told you desire, but what lies within the divine field around you that is purposeful in each present moment. So you begin to see the support, in other words, the information, the knowledge, which in our day was key, as well as a shift perhaps in your own consciousness, an ability to work in a physical plane, to be in a physical body in a more expanded sense. Now, the other advantage in working with the 369 pattern or geometry is it facilitates synchronicity. So, in a balanced energy pattern or matrix, if we are quantum, meaning in physical terms, we are present with everything that's happening around us, we will again see the miracle of how the universe is orchestrating our reality. Certainly, we are the ones through which it is being made manifest. Yet at the same time, we can tangibly touch and interact with things that are coming to us that are perfect for what we need in the moment to either become a more improved version of ourselves, expanded version of ourselves, or to be of service in some dedicated way. So these are the reasons we used these patterns. Some of us were taught a certain breath work where we were chanting and toning in alignment with these various waves or energy signatures. Other times we were taught to use geometries or innate designs, we'll call them mandalas even. These were placed energetically within our field as a practice. And we often would arrange our lives, our living spaces, for example, to meet these various requirements. It wasn't the only tool at our disposal, but it was a very beneficial one. So what you're asking us here is, does the 369 improve a human's ability to move beyond its traumas or where it feels it is a victim? And it doesn't necessarily work that way exclusively. What it does is it helps a human to rise above the density through which those programs have been seeded and be able to see very clearly in the field around it the opportunity to rise above them.
Okay, I'd like to change topics now and go back to ancient times. In previous conversations, we've discussed how in our linear time, about 9 to 12,000 years ago, there was a dimensional shift that occurred. And so prior to that time, time isn't quite the same as what we perceive it today, so it isn't exactly easy to quantify a linear time for events that occurred prior to 9 to 12,000 years ago. But one of my questions, or where I'd like to begin, is I'd like to understand today on the planet, we have this concept of money. And money, of course, is taken form in various forms. We use gold as money. We use silver as a form of money or value, although those aren't really exchanged as much in form. Nowadays, we tend to use what are called fiat currencies, which are often in paper dollar forms or paper currencies in different parts of the world. And these financial systems are run by and orchestrated by a handful of people and large corporations around the planet. So where I'd like to begin this topic is go back to, when did money as we know it today begin? Did it happen after this cataclysm about 9 to 12,000 years ago where there was a dimensional shift, or did it even pre-exist that in some other form?
Well, you must consider that money and the definition of money is a form of exchange that has changed within many dimensional experiences, civilizations, and timelines. So certainly, if we predate the cataclysm that we have spoken of before, we are seeing various material modalities of exchange, but each very tailored to the civilization that it existed within. And we want to start by saying that the foundation of many of the more enlightened civilizations that were using a form of exchange was purpose or somehow driven through a soul's innate contribution, meaning the soul itself was valued as the energetic currency, and what it was creating became the form of exchange. And this evolved by focusing that exchange through a central channel. So when you begin to see money in the way that you describe it today, meaning something that has no deliberate connection to the true vibrational essence of a soul, but is just flat in its vibration and able to be exchanged as a medium for something, this is where malevolent intent begins. Because while you are in a much different dimensional experience than many of these original timelines we are referring to, the direct connection of souls to each other in a purposeful transaction and relationship to their divine energy is how the universe is meant to work. So anything that takes that and puts it into a medium where something that someone creates becomes valued by someone other than it, you're diminishing that energy. So we see this continuing, of course, perhaps beyond the cataclysm we speak of in a more malevolent and deliberately driven focus hierarchially, meaning there are some who are controlling the energy of exchange to their benefit, as opposed to those who are exchanging, receiving the actual benefit.
So when you're saying beyond this cataclysm dimensional shift that occurred around 9 to 12,000 years ago, are you saying prior to, meaning beyond? So prior to that, there were civilizations on the planet that had a hierarchical financial system of some
We're
sort.
saying that was more rare prior to and more abundant after, in other words. Not that there weren't periods of time where rulers were taking, we'll say, advantage of their communities and somehow involving themselves in the process of exchange. But what we believe you're leaning into and what you're referring to with money is more a reflection after as opposed to prior.
Did civilizations such as Atlantis use some sort of monetary exchange that was hierarchical, or was it different?
There wasn't necessarily a hierarchical form of monetary exchange in Atlantis. However, currencies were more apt to be elemental in their manifestation, and this is because Atlantis was a very elementally focused civilization, a highly technological civilization as well. But it does not necessarily mean that these elements were exchanged at a certain value. When you're working in a unified collective, there really isn't a need to necessarily physically exchange in a material way, because everyone's pursuits are focused upon the same endeavor. There isn't any competition necessarily. Everyone is focused on improving the whole of the civilization. So we see some exchange there, perhaps more in terms of knowledge, talents, using various elements from certain geographic regions of Atlantis that were precious and able to be implemented in other areas. And collectives would come together to form, we'll say, groups where these exchanges were evenly and fairly made. It wasn't oversight necessarily. It was all done in a heart-based and more loving and compassionate way.
So when you say elemental, you're referring to things like gold and silver. Is that correct?
We're certainly including that in what we are speaking about, but it's more so even precious crystals that were seen as highly advanced and technological in their power.
So like rubies and other gemstones, that sort of thing?
Yes, correct.
So is there any connection between why we place value on those things today is that something that comes from ancient times?
Certainly, we do see a trend coming from ancient times where the value has been placed on these things. Yet, what's interesting to us to observe is that some of the more precious in their energetic output and strength in terms of healing and technology are the ones that are no longer revered. And we're not saying that gold and silver, for example, these properties aren't of value, yet we might look at a civilization like Atlantis and notice ancient Lemurian crystals that had been brought in from other dimensions that had very high potency and power. These were made of quartz and various we'll say genetic predispositions of that gemstone fused together within the earth and touched by the elements of water. So these were seen as the highest value because they could be programmed. And the programming was never done to slight another or for someone to hold more power than anyone else. This was done to raise the consciousness and the vibration of the entire civilization. So it's hard to say that they were exchanged in a sense of value or a measurement of that value. There simply was great reverence for all of these things. And that's why the reverence, we believe, continues on today.
You mentioned that in ancient times, the way that exchange took place was more based on the value of the soul's contribution or something along those lines. Whereas in more hierarchical systems, such as the financial system we have today, the value is outside of the soul. So let me know if I'm on the right track here. So value outside of the soul, meaning somebody else's contribution would be valued by, I would place a value on it versus that soul itself experiencing a value. Am I on the right track in terms of my understanding there?
Well, let's explain in our own words how we see this in a civilization like Atlantis. It's first important to note that a council guiding and overseeing that civilization was very much similar to ourselves in that they would never involve themselves in not only stating a certain amount of value as to what someone was offering to another, but putting any medium in the way or expectation in the way of that exchange. It was more of a free and open type of civilization whereby each person was valuating what another had to offer by what was necessary for them to thrive. And this was less of an individual endeavor and more of a collective one. So this is where we're coming from in terms of valuation.
Okay, so to take that idea a little further, in that scenario, is it possible for one individual, say in Atlantis, for example, to have more value than another, meaning today we have billionaires on the planet and we have people who are living in poverty. So there's the whole of society places a certain higher value on someone who's a billionaire versus somebody who doesn't have material or financial wealth in the current system. In ancient times, like Atlantis, was that even a concept that they used?
In Atlantis, the highest value in terms of any type of rank or hierarchy had to do with access to the universe and universal knowledge. And that's why you see a council coming together at all. It had little to do with rules or regulations or putting value on certain things more or less, but it had to do with a soul's ability to teach something or to offer energy in a certain way. For example, the councils in Atlantis formed around certain intentions and activities. Some of them were here to guide the youth. And they were often the elder grandmothers who had a great ability to interact with Gaia Sophia as a mother herself and to channel those energies appropriate to guide them in finding their own personal value. If we look beyond that collective, we would see another coming together to support healing. And it was not as if in Atlantis there were rampant diseases. The type of healing work that was being done had to do with energy. These higher dimensional beings, we'll call them, only because of the access and the power that they had often came as a hybrid or from intergalactic councils elsewhere to assist and support those in Atlantis in up-leveling the physical manifestation of their bodies, perhaps helping them to function better or to become lighter or more transparent, working deliberately with the DNA. We see councils forming around many things like this. So councils themselves were very revered, only because of their access to energy and their access to knowledge. A monetary focus, even though we'll say towards the end or the fall of that civilization, began to show itself, but not completely. In that, those who came into the civilization with malevolent intent began to notice the inherent value of the elements that we speak of. These elements were powering incredible technologies that were fusing with the vibration of Earth, using water, for example, as a crystalline and potent frequency to raise vibration and to raise consciousness. But they came to direct those technologies through a specific intention. And this is where hierarchies began to start and where a great deal of malevolent intent began. So even though we don't see a necessarily material and concrete form of exchange, what we begin to see is the desire to put one in place and the hoarding of certain resources and the possession, we'll say, of more collective energies that were there to support the whole as opposed to individuals.
So prior to the fall of Atlantis, when the things you're describing just now, before those took place, before the hierarchical systems came in, was it possible for one person in the society to hold a higher value than another, like we have today, where the amount of wealth you have creates a certain stature in society? Was that even possible during that time?
Well, it was possible, but it didn't actually happen the way that it does today. Because you must remember, in Atlantis, the souls who came there were not inheriting the same programs and history that you are today. In fact, much of what you are working with in terms of individual worth and monetary abundance came much, much later. So it's not to say that there wasn't a sense of ego in Atlantis. In every enlightened civilization, there is an area that the souls there are meant to work on. But often this was looked at in terms of a soul's ability to offer something to the collective as opposed to another. And we won't say this was the case in every situation, nor is it prevalent. But in certain individuals in Atlantis, we might see an inner valuation of what they were contributing as opposed to others. And there might be some contemplation of that they were in a lesser status than another. Yet, because the technologies that were working in Atlantis were so incredibly diligent at holding neutrality, we'll call it, or quantum state, these thoughts or feelings, they didn't hold on in resistance as long as they do today. And we think that's a huge part of the problem. Some of you learn unworthiness or the certain value of money or even your status in the world at a very young age. And then as you come up through various ages, it simply becomes a very ingrained part of your reality that operates in the subconscious. Atlanteans didn't have that same subconscious density or amount of programming going on that humans today are working with. And so it was much easier for them to appreciate everyone's contribution as opposed to having to evaluate it as different than their own.
So at what point so if I'm understanding correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, although some hierarchical systems did exist sporadically prior to 9 to 12,000 years ago, it became more prevalent since that time. So at what point did those systems start to come into place? Was it immediately after that? So let's say approximately 9,000 years ago and sooner?
We are seeing some malevolent intent coming in around this time, yet you have to remember that everything that you're dealing with today came up in various civilizations at various time frames and has combined to manifest in what you're dealing with as the monetary system. So it's hard for us to pinpoint any one period or any one time as being worse than another. Yet we have alluded to the fact in many of these conversations that a reptilian consciousness is what has taken the planet away from its true and organic state of creation and put it in more of a restricted holographic type of experience. And this includes what you are speaking of today. We have even brought a great deal of information in about the Anunnaki, for example, and some of their focus on precious metals and resources and putting hierarchical systems and beliefs in place to ensure that they were the ones who had ownership or access to those. These are some of the beginnings of what you are referring to and speaking to today.
Didn't the Anunnaki pre-exist the Atlanteans or coexist?
They have, but we have to keep in mind that the timeline that you think has ended has continued on and simply changed. So even though we see Anunnaki influence prior to Atlantis, it doesn't necessarily mean that Anunnaki influence has affected all of the civilizations beyond that time. So again, we're going to direct you back to what we're referring to in the unification of a collective, especially a highly advanced and elementally sound civilization. You're working with a spiral of time, but you're doing that very unconsciously. A highly conscious civilization is going to have knowledge of and experience of what happened before, but able to utilize that knowledge in a very completely different way than what an unconscious collective does. So certainly the timeline of the Anunnaki has continued on. And if we look at what's happening today in a sense of what you call slavery, for example, or hoarding resources and valuing them for the slight and not the many. This has just changed hands. It's reconfigured. It's become something different in how it manifests, yet the underlying vibration is exactly the same.
So is it fair to say that the Anunnaki on planet Earth, anyway, were the ones who originated this idea of a hierarchical system where there's slaves and masters, or where some people have power and wealth and others are the opposite?
Well, again, you're trying to linearly pinpoint one race as being the cause of something so great. And while we agree that this is a highly influential timeline and a highly influential group of beings who still exist and are causing destruction today, we can't exclusively blame them for all that has happened. So we tend to put malevolent hybrids into one category. And sometimes we refer to them as reptilian, and sometimes we refer to them as Anunnaki. Yet there are many other contributors to what's happening today. It's the vibration that you're seeing manifesting in different forms.
So what civilization was it on planet Earth in our linear timeline since 9,000 years ago that, for example, the Phoenicians or any number of those ancient civilizations that originated the concept of money that we are living with today?
If we go back to ancient Mesopotamia, for example, we are seeing the beginning influences of some of this. But even before that, what we notice is a hierarchical system was put into place using different formats. In other words, sometimes a soul had to go through a medium such as a collective of beings to approve what they were yet to exchange, or that exchange or material manifestation was no longer theirs to own. It became a collectively owned or a individually owned value. Yet, if we look across the board from not only Mesopotamia, and you have said, for example, the Phoenicians, to many other civilizations, we begin to notice the need to easier make available evaluated exchange, meaning as opposed to having to go through a certain council or legally take ownership of something, we instead value it and control it through an outside source. And this continues on today because what we have noticed is humans have been enslaved and entrained in this idea that they have ownership of nothing. They only have the ability to pay others for things that are owned. So you're thinking of money, and we look back at civilizations where land, for example, or real estate became the focus of that hierarchy or that mode of exchange. And kings and rulers fought many wars to claim ownership to lands that others had to pay in order to live upon. It's just a different way of exchanging material and controlling energy than in other civilizations.
When you say Mesopotamia, you're referring to the Sumerians or that race?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So they, at least for the sake of simplicity, we could say they originated the concept of money that we still use today.
For the sake of simplicity.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So how did we get to a collective where was this because of and I understand what we discussed earlier about trying to quantify things in a linear format when things are happening multidimensionally. But for the sake of our own intellectual understanding, I'm trying to solidify this into a timeline format that most people can comprehend. So where did this concept of slavery originate? Which it sounds to me, and I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. So the concept of money that we use today, that originated with the Sumerians in this linear timeline is something that's really rooted in slavery, which originated with the Anunnaki. Is that correct?
We're in agreement.
Okay.
Yes.
So money is really not about money as we see today as a financial exchange system, but it's really an extension of slavery.
Or perhaps ownership.
Okay.
Yes.
Ownership of material things which human bodies or human beings are part of.
Even beyond, we believe it's ownership of energy. Because if you have to output energy in order to receive something material that a slight few own, then even your energy has become capitalized upon and owned by someone else.
So was the Sumerian race, and I know there are always exceptions to every rule, just like there are human beings that are very conscious today and human beings who are not so conscious. But on the whole, was the Sumerian race primarily a reptilian consciousness-based race?
Hybrid, yes. And of course, we have to reiterate what you are saying. Every race has its exclusions. There are benevolent, malevolent, and everywhere in between. But you must keep in mind that when intergalactic beings come to planet Earth, they are apt to hybridize. And the hybridization process within itself, it's very intricate and meticulous, and many things can go wrong. And what we began to notice in some of these civilizations, and we can go back and tell many stories, is that portals began to become owned and operated by a focus of a certain being or a race. And there were actually wars throughout the galactic universe over ownership to earthly portals. Now, this doesn't necessarily happen or exist today, even though we know that some of the portals that are entry points for Earth become easily corrupted. But alternate technologies have been put in these portals to both assist as well as manipulate beings who are coming through. And this we see as one of the detrimental events having to do with Syrians, for example, or the Sumerians, for example, coming through these portals and being interrupted genetically and altered sonically into a different form.
I see. So these Sumerians might not have been in this reptilian altered state originally, but when they came through those portals, that caused them to have that influence.
Yes, correct.
So when we're referring to the Sumerians and so on, we're referencing people like Gilgamesh and so on?
Yes.
Okay. So what role did Gilgamesh play? Because he's a prominent role, or at least an individual who we have some record of having existed. What was his role in this creation of the structure? Was he primarily of a reptilian influence as well?
We do see some reptilian influence here, and there is many different vantage points that we can take on his journey, because not only is he a hybrid, but he also sat on many councils throughout the universe, having access to the wisdom and the energy of these councils. So as remember, as beings come through certain portals, there are disturbances and changes that go on. There's alterations that take place, and sometimes this takes a being with malevolent intent and can turn them benevolent, and vice versa. But you're asking about a role, and we refer to a divine plan that may have been skewed from its origins. And we do notice there was an immediate focus on ensuring some system in which there could be valuation of what others were providing, not to set people apart deliberately so much as to create a structure that could be looked upon by others and mirrored in moving the earth into a more not necessarily technological age from a technology standpoint, but to mirror some of the experiences that have been had beyond the earth. And it's hard for us to explain how money works in the alternate realms, but very similar systems and structures have been put in place on other planets. And yes, some of them have been very suppressive, and others have not. They've been more free and sovereign, and they've simply been to help create a more balanced energetic environment. And we think this was some of the original intent, actually, to level the playing field, to create a more balanced energetic environment. But any time that you put a material structure in the way of an energetic predisposition, you're going to have a very hard time. And so if we look at the being you're referring to, and we could bring up other examples as well, what we see is working in a material plane, attempting to use a more enlightened and metaphysical consciousness, but the two not actually matching up very well, where there are ramifications for that. And certainly this has happened in many different examples. So it's hard for us to explain his complete role in saying that it was all predestined and all that happened was how it was meant to happen. It's the same with many of you today. You come in with a divine plan, and it is what you describe as an open container in which there are many options to raise it and lower it in vibration.
Now, Gilgamesh is very commonly depicted in ancient sculptures of him, and even to modern times, as holding a lion in his hands, as if the lion is about the size of a typical dog or would be for us today. Was that because Gilgamesh was a giant?
We see him as a giant manifesting in this way, absolutely. But again, we want to remind you that that hybridization process is always the reason, meaning light is being transformed into material, which is ultimately information. So the giants that you see throughout history, or the gods and goddesses that you see in various forms, came through this way as a material representation of light and information. And that means ultimately that he was working with more energy on a physical plane than what those who were more normalized in size were. But that does not necessarily carry through to the timeline that you are on. So we know that my next question might be, are those who are taller in linear and physical size working with more light and energy? Not necessarily, because your DNA has been completely changed. And you are still seeing a legacy and a lineage play out from some of these time periods, but it isn't necessarily reflective of light and vibration.
Well, some of the giants from ancient times were referred to as the Nephilim, who were apparently offspring of the fallen angels. So would somebody like him be considered a Nephilim, or was he just some other race that came through a portal to manifest here?
We don't necessarily see the Nephilim as one race. So it isn't correct, we believe, to say that he would be a member of this race. We know historically and scientifically it feels important to put all of these beings, because of similar characteristics, into one category. But if we're looking at an offspring of fallen angels, what we have to keep in mind is this offspring is going to manifest in various forms, holding different DNA genetic predispositions to that fallen angel. And remember, this was a collective of many different intergalactic souls. So certainly we see how the Nephilim could be looked at as similar in their orientation. Yet if we look beneath the surface as to the energy template and DNA that they were working with, there are some deviations.
Is there any significance of why he's depicted holding a lion? Is there some representation there?
When we see the lion throughout history, and there are very subtle differences in the appearance, these are often relating to the Syrians as well as the Illyrians, who came to planet Earth and took on these forms and characteristics. Not as the lions you necessarily see today, but certainly holding a very similar appearance. And the Syrians at the time, as we look at them on planet Earth, they were more love-based and benevolently focused, uh, helping to teach mankind about the access to frequency and to joy, and to manipulate that within their own physical bodies for the benefit of all. Not to say that the clutching of the lion within the hand was a desire to implicate that whatsoever. But those who had a more prominent hybrid stance as a ruler were often attempting to show not only a genetic connection, but a hierarchical aspect of that connection, meaning perhaps on another planet, they had taken a similar position as a ruler or a guide or a teacher.
Okay, so we can sort of loosely connect that was he referencing the Syrians or the connection with the Syrians by having the lion in his depictions?
Yes.
And you said that still carries through to today, right? Is
It,
the use of the lion today still represent that?
Well, it depends on what you are referring to. If we are looking at ancient relics, for example, certainly we see the depiction of the lion as often representing the Syrian presence on planet Earth. But remember also there are some Lyran influences as well that may have been seen in a very similar light.
What about the use of the lion in, for example, the film industry today? Is there some reference point there to the Syrians? Syrians?
There is some, but also not all. We see the lion as depicting a sense of courage, and especially being the king over its collective, over its family. And there are many influences within the film industry that suppose to be the king in terms of overseeing an entire collective.
Okay, getting back to Gilgamesh, in that Sumerian civilization that he was part of, what was the means of exchange? Was it gold or precious metals of some sort?
Yes, we are seeing precious metals, but not exclusively gold at first, because the prominence of gold in that civilization was not something that was readily available at first, even though you may look back at these historic accounts and see it as being left behind. We see some of the original form of exchange being in a coin, kind of similar to what many of you are used to in this day and age. Not that it was a pressed or a technological coin, but there were those who were in charge of ensuring a similarity of the type of modality that was being exchanged, meaning they were searching for similarly shaped objects and sometimes able to put them through a certain press or a technology to soften the edges or to make it appear as if it came from the same source, in other words.
Is it fair to say that the race, or rather not the race, but the group of individuals who primarily oversee at the very top levels of the financial structure in society today are a bloodline relationship to the Sumerian civilization we're referencing?
We more relate to a reptilian bloodline than we do this one, not because there is no influence of this bloodline there. But what you have to keep in mind is that the more predominant genetic predisposition is always going to become forefront or come to the forefront, be prioritized. It's very similar with all of you. You come as hybrids yourself from a melting pot of many different intergalactic families that seeded humanity, but you are all taking different paths of discovering these various family lineages and coming up through a predestined, perhaps, focus of those lineages. Remember, the reptilians on planet Earth, they came because of a strong seated genetic thread that was prevalent within you. And that thread has been focused on throughout history. So regardless of whether a soul was a Syrian reptilian hybrid, or even a human with a predisposition towards that reptilian genetic, it's become stronger and stronger.
So, how did we end up in a society today where, for example, in some of our earlier conversations, we've discussed how all human beings come to Earth with let's say, a cosmic bank account where we pre-planned for us to have the resources that we needed in order to fulfill our life journey. Is it reasonable to say that is actually happening today, meaning there is this great discrepancy in society between the people who have money or wealth, as we term it today, let's say dollars in a bank or whatever, and those who have nothing. And so is it reasonable to say that large discrepancy still accounts for each individual human being's ability to fulfill their mission, meaning the ones who have nothing, they have nothing because they chose, or nothing meaning nothing as we would quantify in a financial sense. They have nothing because they chose to have a life where that's all that they needed, versus those who have billions or even trillions of dollars have that because that's something they prearranged to have in this life, or is that something that is happening as a result of this slavery dynamic?
Well, this is a complicated question to answer, and there are many different facets that we want to bring to your attention. But to assume that you have a cosmic bank account, it defines an energy field that you are all incarnated within. And this is where we want to introduce the concept of source energy and what it truly is. If God or prime creator became conscious and began to understand that it was influencing a field, then knowing itself and becoming a creator, everything it has ever created, either vibrationally or physically, makes up that source field. So source field is a vibrating energy, a connection that you hold to everything that ever has been created. And the advantage to this is twofold. If you come with a divine plan and you are here on a predestined course of both fulfilling your soul's evolutionary path as well as interfacing with the great spiral of time and changing some of the things that you saw about it that need to be ascended, everything that you draw into your experience is here to support your unique contribution. But that unique contribution and that part of you that is connected to the source field is something very misunderstood. So if we go back in time, even in this lifetime, to the very beginning, to your first breath as a child, you have been trained beyond who you are as a human soul, what your talents and gifts are, who you are here to be and what you are here to do. You even believe that when you face challenges, you are meant to suffer. And ingrained in you is a program that you must effort beyond what source provides in order to receive it. So your source is actually not your source any longer. You speak of a hierarchy, reptilians, we could call them families, bankers, who hold that source energy. this is not the same thing. It's an artificial source. It's a medium. It's something that you have been trained to go through in order to get what you desire, which ultimately takes you out of the field where everything that you need will be magnetized at the perfect time to receive it. So thoughts, emotions, desires that are generated from beliefs beyond the truth of who you are causing you to go to a source to find something for happiness that could never fulfill you. And this is why you're seeing the billionaires and the millionaires of the world ultimately creating so much chaos, because if they were truly fulfilled and feeling purposeful and joyful in who they are, they would not need to destroy the lives of others. And this is a vicious cycle. Many of you are destroying your own lives. You are here suffering so dramatically over things that should truly come so easily. And to get back into alignment with your true source sometimes means to cut the cord on all of the things that lead you astray from it. And we know that it's a very lofty statement to make in our position, because it may seem there are so many things that are leading you away from that field. But our advice is to take a fast on anything that's causing you stress or causing you to believe that you are not sufficient or worthy, and step into the relaxation of what Source is already providing, because there are always tangible things in your life that are coming in to support you that may not be what you've been taught you are supposed to have, but will always lead you to a better manifestation of it. So what we believe is happening is you're moving through alternate dimensions in working with source energy. This is where the analogy of the container can beautifully come in. You can have an experience of a pattern of unworthiness or even slavery or bankruptcy in your life. And source energy is still going to provide what you need to overcome that. But if you think that you have to work very hard to show the past, the generations in the past, what they've done wrong, you're looking in the opposite direction of where all of that healing and energy exists, where you can raise it up into a higher and higher and higher dimension. So sometimes it takes letting go of all of the things we think we need to be and the things we think we need to do in order to become what we've been told we should be, and sink into the acceptance of who we are now to get back into alignment of that field, which ultimately has nothing to do with money. But because money exists on planet Earth today in the form that it does, it has to be a part of your source field. So in other words, you may think that God and source do not want you to have money. But if money's become a requirement for living in a certain way, money is always going to be a part of the source field of every soul that incarnates into this experience. But if they believe they shouldn't have it, or something is blocking them from it, it will not come. If there is a pattern that you are meant to experience from the past of losing that money, there's always something else of its equal value that is meant to carry you through that experience. And that equal value could be another human being. And so this is where the analogy of Atlantis beautifully comes back in. Nobody was setting or determining the value of anything else. The individual was providing something uniquely of themselves through which value came back. And this is where we believe you are going to in the future. And this can organically change your monetary system. In fact, we believe it already is. So putting the power of a source that now exists outside of you and is owned by someone else back into your own hands starts within you. And there's evidence of this already showing itself in the material and physical plane.
Okay, so I want to string a few ideas together you just brought up. just to make sure I'm understanding the concept. So let's just, to overly simplify the concept, let's say that a soul incarnates onto planet Earth in a human form, and they have a cosmic bank account of $100. And so, and they chose that cosmic bank account of $100 because that's what they would need in this lifetime to fulfill their purpose or mission or human experience that they came here to have. So, what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, is that if they were left to their own, and if society didn't have this hierarchical slavery-based monetary system, they would have that $100 in this lifetime to fulfill that mission or purpose. But because we're raised in a society where we're programmed to believe in certain things, and even to believe in this hierarchical system that puts the power outside of ourselves. For example, the United States education system originated in Germany and was taught to, or was brought to the United States in order to create a society of people who are workers, who work inside the system that the people at the top benefit from financially. So is what you're saying that if left to our own, and if we were not conditioned through these methods such as the education system to believe and accept that this $100 that we came in with was not ours to have. So that's the reason why we see people in poverty today. So perhaps many people who struggle financially today are struggling not because they chose to have that little when they came here, but rather their belief systems have caused them to restrict or be in resistance to whatever bank account. So for example, the person who came with $100 may actually only have access to $5, but not because they couldn't have the $100, but because they convinced themselves that they can't.
Again, there are many great points in here that we want to address, but we want to start with the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty is not what you often believe it to be. It is equated to freedom and being able to do the things that you want to do when you want to do them, which is certainly a part of your experience, and we might even say an aspect of universal law. But if you have been taught that in order to be free, there are conditions placed around it, meaning there is a certain amount of money that you need to be free, that limiting belief or program that has been put in your field exists right along with that $100 or everything else that source energy wants to provide. In fact, we could never limit a cosmic bank account to $100 because it's such a small value for a human being who is here to live out a full and joyful life. And that goes beyond money, because that money comes through the hands of individuals. It comes through the expression of your own soul's essence. So any restriction or any density that you place in your field, whether it be through a commonly held belief or even a collectively based belief that carries more weight than a singular one, you are going to be skewing your potential and ability to work with that field. Yet, the energy of exchange and how the motion of energy carries through you is a very important consideration. Remember, everything that is in your cosmic bank account or source field is an extension of who you are. You believe it exists somewhere else and that it is separate of you, but it could never be. So the degree to which you are authentically expressing yourself in the world is the degree to which your access to everything that is your birthright falls into your fingertips. But it could never be what you imagine, and this is the problem, is there has been so much programming, whether it has been schooling, for example, or government, or a family lineage that exists within your DNA. These things are all accounting for a sense of suppression, where we believe we have to work in order to receive or prove ourselves even in order to receive something that we are originally not worthy of. Let's take a rite of passage here. Many on planet Earth go through a rite of passage where they're able to first drive a car and then able to secure a job. And it is assumed that before that time, they don't hold a great deal of worth because they are not contributing either to their own lives in a monetary sense or even to the lives of others in some way. And this is where things get very backwards. It's not to say we are here to inflate the ego of our youth to become so prideful that they believe they must not do any work, but it's the idea that work is what creates the identity that actually slights a soul from what it is able to achieve. But beyond this, we must keep in mind that this field around us is also collective. So we're going to throw another high-level concept in here, not to confuse you or even to disappoint you, but the world at large, everyone who's incarnated in the timeline that you've chosen, it's entangled in a matrix, a web of consciousness through which that energy of exchange is perpetuated. So if you are meant to receive that $100 through the hands of an individual who also does not believe that they are worthy enough to receive it, there is a great deal of alternate suppression going on even beyond yourself. And that's why we believe it is so important today for those who are listening to these concepts to adopt them within their personal lives, because by contract, you are connected to souls who are family members and friends and acquaintances, and those you won't even know for a very long period in your life, who you are influencing through your vibration. So we are actually accentuating an entire field of exchange and our ability to receive through our own source field. The more we live our lives to our soul's true purpose and live it to our true heart's content, as opposed to all of the things that have been seeded within us.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate the point just for clarity's sake. When I was using the $100 amount, it was not necessarily, it was just for an illustration of the concept. Let's just use $100 million as another illustration. Let's say a soul, what I'm trying to understand is if a soul came to Earth with a cosmic bank account of $100 million, to that would be made available to them throughout their lifetime to fulfill whatever purpose they came here to fulfill. Is it possible for that person to, because of their thought process and the society in which they live today, to restrict that $100 million to, let's say, $1,000 or $50,000 or whatever, something significantly less? I'm trying to understand if people who are living in poverty, because we live in a society today where there is such a discrepancy where in the United States, for example, which is considered one of the more wealthy nations in the world, over 50% of the population is living in poverty, and only a small fraction would be considered wealthy. Is that discrepancy existing because all of those souls who are living in poverty simply chose to have that little amount because they wanted to experience that? Or is it because they are limiting themselves from their full bank account?
We understand what you are asking here. So we want to answer it in a couple of different ways. First, because poverty exists within the human condition and the spiral of time, it is guaranteed that souls will experience it until they rise above it. So poverty as an experience, no different than disease, for example, or childhood trauma, is something that souls will accept when they come for the purpose of rebalancing that energetic experience. So even though a soul never achieves the amount of money that it needs to move beyond poverty in its entire life, how it lives that experience vibrationally is the greatest contributing factor, meaning how it perceives the richness of its life beyond money can be just as powerful as actually achieving the amount of money it needs as well. But what you're asking us is, does the inheritance ever change? So if everyone on the planet comes with a vibrational inheritance that can be monetarily and physically manifested, are they able to lower that amount simply because of what they believe and who they are? No, not necessarily. But what we want you to imagine is that everything in this field is energetic in nature. It isn't predetermined to be a physical monetary currency until you get here and manifest it as such. So if everything is an energetic match between you and the source field around you, and you have a hierarchical structure on planet Earth that is siphoning your energy, in a sense, you are lowering your potential to bring it into being. So it's not that the amount itself becomes lowered, but your energy becomes lowered to the degree that you're able to match its vibration. And this is done in so many different ways. For example, the most prominent pattern that we're seeing within humans today is energetic depletion. This can be felt in a physical way because you have been stressed, you have been put into fear, you have been asked to do things outside of the range of your responsibility, and you've chosen lifetimes and lifestyles that have been suggested for you as opposed to the norm of what you were meant to put into your life. And this is automatically going to have an effect on your access of that bank account. In other words, if your energetic output or the sense of energy that you feel is not equal to the amount of money that has been predetermined you are meant to receive, you are certainly not going to receive it. But this is where we know it begs the question, how does that manifestation process take place? Where does the exchange happen between the vibration and the amount of money and the energy of the soul who is receiving it? That exchange is actually happening in a quantum way. And it gets tricky here, we know. We talk about being quantum and being present quite a lot. And we talk about the concept of neutrality often. Souls are deliberately taken out of the present moment to stay in the past or to be in the future because this is where their access to that energy truly exists. To move it from a vibrational equivalent of a monetary abundance and into the physical manifestation of that abundance requires you to see where source or your own soul wants it to come from. Meaning there is always going to be an opportunity placed before you to create a bridge between where your soul resides on planet Earth and where the money resides in the cosmic bank account. But you so often miss those clues and cues and synchronicities and gifts that you negate your own reward. In other words, there's always a subconscious program filtering you away or creating a density between who you are today and the beliefs that you have about yourself and where that monetary abundance exists. So we think it's truly across the board in how this comes into physical reality. Again, whether it is programmed in school, whether it becomes a part of the enslavement system of society, or whether you've inherited it as a genetic program, there are a variety of different outlets to keep humans beyond the true access and power of their spirit, which rests in the quantum field.
Okay, so to clarify the concepts you just mentioned, the cosmic bank account, which is a vibrational potential that we all come in onto planet Earth to express our journey, cannot be altered. So that is a predefined thing. But what you're saying is that the energetic depletion that human beings are experiencing as a result of the hierarchical structures and our thought process and the kind of psychological programming we've had is causing us to diminish our access to that cosmic bank account. And as a result, some people who are experiencing poverty may not have had to experience poverty. It may not have been a journey that their soul chose to have, but they have put themselves there as a result of their own ability to access this bank account.
That's correct. We agree with you. And what we're attempting to demonstrate here is a relationship between the ownership of money and the ownership of your soul or your energy field, which is ultimately a parallel expression. It just seems completely different. There are beings on planet Earth who are taking possession of the energy of your soul, and in so doing, also diminishing your ability to access the abundance that is truly yours to receive, that isn't being taken away necessarily, but you will never realize and will offer and contribute to those who are separate of your energy field.
So is the monetary system itself taking power or taking our soul's power away and giving it to the few, or is it, what's the mechanism that's doing that?
We understand that it's important for you to reclaim your possession of the monetary system, but we simply see it a manifestation of each soul's worth from a collective vantage point. Certainly, things have been put into place to control the monetary system, which is merely a centralized means of exchanging energy. But the more you are taking your energy and sovereignty back, the less that monetary system can be owned by someone outside of you, meaning you are going to see it change. And we've already indicated we're seeing this change taking place on the surface of planet Earth with the introduction of new currency models that are more sovereign. Yet, this is just the tip of the iceberg. It truly hasn't come to the point of fruition where it's a free and sovereign system in reciprocity of what your soul's nature actually is.
Okay, well, we're probably going to come back to these concepts further in a future conversation, but I want to sort of wind up today with an understanding. So is it fair to say then that if more people had sovereignty or didn't, let's say, give away their soul's energy to this current hierarchical system, that we would see more of an even playing field in terms of people's monetary abundance? Meaning, let's take the United States as an example. We wouldn't see 60% of the people living in poverty and only maybe 2% who are wealthy. We might see the vast majority of the population having more of a abundance and wealth in society, and maybe just a few who might have chosen that experience to have that poverty.
We don't think you're necessarily going for wealth, even though we know that's an important consideration in the topic that you've brought to our attention. What we believe you will see is more prosperity and fulfillment, meaning not every soul is going to require or necessarily need the same amount of monetary abundance to achieve the level of their soul's fulfillment that another will. But ultimately, what's going on today is there's been a skewing of that potential. And this is why you see so much suffering. It is important to note, because you have brought up so many themes of inequality, that the more inequality is focused on, the more it becomes strengthened in the field. And there is an agenda in the world today to ensure humans' energetic focus on solving inequality, because in and of itself, it is creating more of it, which isn't just affecting the people that you think it is. We know that some may look at racial inequality, for example, as being a problem on planet Earth that must be solved by those who do not experience it. But the more that those who don't experience it actually get involved in the problem and focus on it, the bigger the problem it will become. You are not here to carry forth the issues of the past and to resolve them through the choices that you make today. You're actually here to be focused in what is working on the planet in such a way that it can be adopted by others, and energy and information and knowledge can be shared. We think this is one of the biggest issues that you're actually facing in all of these various areas where there seems to be suppression. It isn't necessarily suppression of resource, it's actually suppression of knowledge. And if that knowledge was made more available to everyone on the planet, you would see a tremendous change.
Well, I just want to clarify a few concepts to finish up our conversation for today. When I'm referring to monetary abundance and poverty and so on, I'm really referring to the state of being of that. For example, as you've stated, it's not a particular dollar amount. So it doesn't mean that a person, well, let's explain the concept of poverty as I'm trying to use it here today. A person who is typically in poverty in, let's say, the United States or anywhere in the world has the perception of struggling financially, which would imply what you're stating is that lack of fulfillment. Because if you're struggling financially or feeling the lack of things in your life, that means that you are not fulfilled. But you can just as well have no monetary abundance in terms of, for example, paper dollars, and still feel fulfilled and thriving in your life. So, but in the United States, as an example, when we use the concept of poverty, that concept of poverty is directly linked to a monetary abundance. And so we can imply that for the most part, that 60% of the population that is in poverty is not feeling fulfillment as well. They're limiting their fulfillment as much as we see a limitation in their monetary abundance. Am I on the right track there?
We agree that there is no amount of monetary abundance that is able to generate fulfillment within a soul. And the monetary system, by its very nature, is a controlling system, which means it is taking the power out of the hands of those who believe they need it and putting it in the hands of a slight few. And the control has to be addressed as well, because the problem that we're seeing with those who do not have the amount of money that they desire is they are putting control in the way of receiving something very innate to them. And control is a very unnatural way of being on planet Earth. Whether you believe you're being controlled or you are attempting to control others, you are not going to find the source of abundance that you need.
Okay, so is it fair then to, as a generalization, to assume that if someone is struggling financially, so struggling being the operative term here, because as we've stated, if a person has no money at all but they're fulfilled, then they're abundant. But if if they're struggling financially, meaning I'm in a state of being right now where I'm in fear, or I feel lack, or I feel the lack of freedom to be able to do the things I want to do, or even purchase the things I want to purchase to feel fulfilled, that is what I mean by struggling. So if I'm in a state right now where I'm struggling financially in that way, is it fair to assume that means that I have that I'm in some way limiting my access to this field of abundance or cosmic bank account that I came here with?
It is hard for us to say that this is true in every case because remember, the theme throughout the human condition of abundance or the lack thereof is going to play out in the divine plan of many souls. However, the important thing to note is that no one soul is ever meant to experience poverty or a lack of abundance throughout their entire incarnation. So anytime we see someone who goes through their entire life or a very elongated period or stretch of time without the basic material needs of their soul being met, we know there must be some unnatural influence or orchestration going on from beyond them. And this is where we think it's very important to, again, get back into alignment with your divine plan, not having to know what it is necessarily, but to look back on your life and notice the areas where you have been creatively suppressed or somehow taken away from your soul's true talents or true nature. And not to even put them into action right away, but just the reunion with ourselves energetically in knowing that there is something of value we came to offer sets off a chain of events within us that can open us up to more abundance. But consciousness is also the key, and we've replayed this theme in various questions that you have asked us, even going back to Atlantis, these very high scale technologies that were able to support vibration and consciousness of the entire civilization. We think these things can be brought back into your personal experience, even doing a very unique meditation practice that relaxes you, takes you out of a state of control and fight or flight, and puts you into a more expanded viewpoint is going to be essential, because that expanded viewpoint, that state of higher consciousness, is inevitably going to lead you down a path of support or somehow finding the abundance that you need, even at the very lowest levels, to get you through to the next stage of your journey. And ultimately, when we don't think we have what we need, we're being called to our inner world to realize that we are everything that has ever been needed by the entire world. It's a period of time where we can contemplate what we came here to offer and the gifts and abilities that we may have been in fear of accepting, but now must be embraced in order for us to live the life that we want as an example for others.
Okay, we may not finish this conversation today, but I want to ask one more thing. So let's take the billionaires of the world, and I believe there are trillionaires in the world today too, which we don't know publicly about. But so these are individuals who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, who have immense wealth and monetary abundance in the structure of the world we have today, and they control that structure for that reason. So using this concept that we discussed today, how is it they're accessing that much? Do they come into this world with that much in their cosmic bank account, or are they skewing it in their favor in some way to produce that result?
So remember, there are many energetic practices that are being used by these families, for example, that are tapping into the energy matrix of the collective. And we could spend hours talking about these various techniques and ceremonies, but it's important to understand that energy is going to flow where it is being called. In other words, if we do not take ownership of our energy, someone else will possess it for us. And that is ultimately what is happening. From the material standpoint, however, there is a whole alternative source system that has been built and maintained in order for these individuals to receive more than perhaps what their soul's plan has offered. And yes, we can see deviations in a soul's ability to accentuate beyond its own field what it draws from others. This is often done in very dedicated and religious practices of siphoning the energy of others to assume some level of power. But this money or wealth that's being generated, keep in mind, it's often coming from very materially creative ideas where systems and entire structures are being put in place by those who want to sway an entire planet in their direction. And this could only come through an ability to work with energy so diligently that opportunities are seen to take advantage. And this is ultimately what you're going for. So, you having a kind heart and a loving predisposition, you're not setting out to expand consciousness and to practice spirituality to receive from others, but to see the advantages of strengthening yourself to the degree that you are able to use that inheritance for the benefit of others. And so it's a reverse type of equation in the sense of those in power. But we want to also add in the idea of law of attraction and the practices that are known to be used to manifest in this way. And they are not malevolently intended, we want to say first and foremost, yet there has been some influence here. Anytime you are focused on a certain amount of monetary abundance exclusively for yourself in order to build wealth or status, for example, it's no different than some of the more meticulous and advanced systems and programs that those in power are using. They're accumulating wealth and creating a false hierarchical system that others believe is real. And in doing so, creating a lot of separation in that matrix that we speak of. So the second you become focused on a practice to assume a certain amount of monetary abundance that puts you above and beyond others, keep in mind that you can be creating contradictions in that matrix by your very intention. It is only with a pure heart and with an affirmation of sharing or being of service that we think that these practices are truly the most beneficial.
So just to clarify, these practices or energetic practices that the billionaires, for example, in the world are using, you're referring back to what we discussed in previous conversations about the secret kabbalistic teachings, right?
Correct.
Okay. So they're using these kabbalistic teachings, and the vast majority of the human civilization is essentially selling their soul or their energetic contribution to these individuals who are using these practices to siphon that energy, and which is what's manifesting as their monetary abundance, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So this is a topic we're going to have to come back to, but just if we can sort of wrap it up with maybe a simple, or at least a start that we can pick up next time. How do you mentioned meditation, but how do individuals, so if you are somebody who is struggling financially at the moment, and it's a pretty good chance that you've given up your soul's energetic potential to this system, how do you reverse that?
There is a higher mind. There is a part of you that exists beyond the veil that is accounting for all of the things in your source field that must come and can come, but it is not often that higher mind that we are operating from. We are operating from a corrupted mind, one that has been trained in a certain way of thinking, always comparing and judging, and again, focused in the past or in the future. So the most beneficial meditation practice is to access that higher mind. And that is a place of stillness where we are not reliant on manifesting anything. We're not putting intentions in the field to be or to do anything other than accessing our calm and our connection. This can set us up throughout the day to stay within range of that quantum field where all of the energy of our bank account, in other words, actually exists, where it becomes tangible. We see it in a sign or a synchronicity. We're able to take advantage of the opportunities that show up for us in each present moment, and especially appreciate all of the things that we have in our lives that are supporting us right now. This is where we must remain, and it is perhaps the first step to obliterating many of those subconscious programs that we do not even believe are carrying us so outside of this very abundant field. It is not one meditative practice that we always like to suggest, because we know each of you are individuals. But whatever brings you to a place of rest, a place of peace, a place of mindfulness, where you are able to interact with the physical field in a very clear, present, and deliberate way, is going to be the most powerful one for you to use in order to move beyond any experience of poverty.
Well, we'll finish up there for today. It's a big topic we'll probably pick up on in future conversations, but thank you for being with us today, and thank you, Micheila. And thank you all for joining us for another show today, and we will be back again next week. You can also find us on other platforms now, on different podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and Alexa, as well as Spotify and others. So look for us on other platforms. We'll be expanding further from there in the months and years ahead as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.